the Orlando Sentinel, which you all knew. 3 times a week, his column focuses on the interesting, funny, maddening, crazy things that make Florida, well, Florida. He particularly enjoys telling readers what the politicians do not, and I certainly appreciate that. Scott came to the Sentinel in 1998 when he covered Orange County. He started his column in 2002, and his work has received awards from the Society of Professional Journalists, the Society of American Business Writers and Editors, and others. He has also been voted best columnist by readers of Orlando Magazine, the Orlando Weekly, and the Sentinel. Before coming to Orlando, Scott worked for the Winston-Salem Journal and the Chapel Hill Herald. He graduated from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill School of Journalism. He and his wife, Cindy, have 2 children, a 16-year-old daughter, Cameron, and a 14-year-old son, Chase. And if you want to know more about him, go online and read his annual disclosure article, which gives his life's history, even telling you what his favorite drink is. So without further ado, let's give a hearty welcome to Scott Max.
Thank you very much, Matt. It is a pleasure to be with all of you today. I like any group that starts drinking around 11:30. So I'm hoping everybody's liquored up so we can, anything I say will be a little funnier than otherwise. And Matt didn't mention, but one of the reasons he was able to get me, not that I'm that hard of a get, was because he requested that I come in December of 2015. It's hard to make up an excuse for being busy when you're 2 calendar years out. So, Matt, you have a very organized speaker in him. Organizer in him. I just thought I would mention, because this will be announced in Sunday's paper, that last night I was at the Orlando Sentinel Central Floridian of the Year ceremony. I know at least one person, Ann Helmuth, was there as well. And in case you didn't know, this year the Sentinel editorial board, not me, but the editorial board chose its Central Floridian of the Year a group of people, which they've only done a couple of times before, and it was the trauma and emergency team at Orlando Regional Medical Center. And there were a lot of deserving finalists, which you'll read more about in the paper on Sunday, but I think the general philosophy was that all of the finalists changed lives, but these people saved lives. And it started in the wee hours of the morning of June 12th, and it went on for the days and weeks and as long as 4 months until the last survivor was released from the hospital. So that was a meaningful night last night. It was also nice because I was in a room full of leaders in Central Florida, and usually when I'm in a room full of leaders in Central Florida, at least 4 of them have been indicted. And as far as I know, none of the Apopka nuns had gotten into any trouble. But they are rowdy. I'm a big fan of the nuns. If you all aren't familiar with their work, they do great things out there. So that was a good reminder of all the great things happening. But today I thought we'd talk a little bit about politics in Florida, Central Florida's role, the newspaper, how it's changed, and the media. And I thought I'd start by telling you just a little bit about me so you know my background. I grew up, as Matt said, in North Carolina as the son of a lawyer and a full-time volunteer. From a very young age, I knew I wanted to write newspapers. In fact, I used to go to my dad's law office and use his mimeograph machine, you remember those, to crank out editions of the Maxwell House News, which had scintillating stories like Scott's dad mows grass, and I would go deliver those around the neighborhood. I think part of the reason I was interested in that is I grew up in the 70s, which was I was a child of the Watergate years, and when you were that age, the concept of a couple of ink-stained wretches being able to topple a presidency was rather scintillating and at least intriguing. One of the mottos that I have adopted as a journalist is that a journalist's motto is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. I thrive a little bit more on the second half of that expression. Though, by the way, and my philosophy on that is that the powerful will always have a voice, being in media or otherwise, but the meek do not, and I think that's sort of my obligation in the media is to give that voice. One of the other expressions that we have in the newspaper business has to do with skepticism. It says, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. My mother hates that expression, but it's one we do try to verify everything. I will tell you that a lot has changed in the newspaper business. I am not as old as some of you in the room, but a lot has changed in just the 2.5 decades I have been writing for newspapers. When I got into the business, we only published once a day, and it's old-fashioned, but I'm going to tell you, there are still some things about that I think were a lot better, because we only got it once a day, but we damn well tried to get it right back then, and it's not always the case now. Even when I started as a columnist, my own real job was to write 3 columns a week. That is completely different now. Now we publish 24 hours a day. I blog, I tweet, I do radio, I do TV, I do online videos, I do Facebook, I do Twitter, I do Google+. I don't even know what the hell Google+ is, but it's one of the things that I do. One of the problems that newspapers have had is that some of their problems have been self-inflicted. And the problem started around the advent of the internet about 20 years ago. When it first came around, newspapers made the really dumb mistake, in my estimation, of giving away the product that they make for free. And you can I know many of you have been in business, you can guess how long you would stay in business if you decided to give your customers an option of paying for the product or getting it for free. It's hard to put that genie back in the bottle, and so now when people start charging for content, as the Sentinel do, a lot of people bristle, and they said, well, I never used to have to do that. That's also been festered by, as that problem is festered when publications do put their stuff and charge for it. Lots of other sites will rip it off and use it for free, and it ends up on social media or on in emails. And one of the things I will never make apologies for is for charging for what we do for a living, because journalism costs money. There is just no two ways about that. If you ever want people at your Winter Park Commission meeting or at your school board meeting, there has to be people who do that. And frankly, I'll tell you, it has to be people who are trained to do that because they bring a different perspective and expertise. So I don't make apologies for that, but the reality of newspaper finances is that they are not what they used to be. And I'll give you some just stark and honest numbers, because I know we're all friends here. I've only been at the Sentinel for about 19 years. In that time, our newsroom is approximately 30 to 40% of the size it was when I came here. I ate lunch with the same 4 guys for a decade. All 4 decided to leave within a period of about 8 months. No one we went for a period of 7 years at the Orlando Sentinel where no one got a raise. Now, I tell you that by way of giving you sort of a frank and honest explanation of what newspaper finances are, but also to tell you that one thing you know is the people who are still doing what we do at the newspaper are largely true believers. And I would count myself among that. I believe there's a role for what we do, but it is not the same business as we got into. And one of the realities also is that people know we're not as big as we used to be, and there's some odd interactions I've had, and I'll share one kind of comical one with you. Some of you may have heard this before, but I go running, and sometimes I'll run around here and all through Winter Park and around. And one day I was on my morning run, and I passed a house that I happened to know belonged to Mel Martinez. And you may know Mel Martinez. He was our county chairman, HUD secretary. The man never finished a job. But he went on to become U.S. Senator. And I got to his house, and his paper happened to be at the front, at the end of his driveway. And I thought, what the heck, as I sometimes do. I picked up his paper, and I thought I would go take it and put it on his stoop. And would you know, as soon as I get up to his front door, I'm covered in sweat. Mel opens the front door. He's standing there in his pajamas. And there he sees the Orlando Sentinel's Metro columnist delivering his paper. And he said, Scott? And I said, yeah, things have gotten that bad. But while we have our financial issues, what I will still tell you is that I believe we do what we do better than anyone else. We are the ones going to the city council meetings. We are the ones reporting on demographic trends. We are looking at crime trends, not just the shooting of the day, but the crime trends and what's happening in the police departments, doing investigative reports. And in my case, and I think some of my others, we're telling you about scary or troubling legislation or bills before they pass, because my personal take is it doesn't do you much good to tell you about what's happened after it's taken place. And the other thing I think we do most importantly is that we get it right. Not always. We did a glowing profile on someone who it turned out was dead one year. That was an interesting correction we had to run. But when we get it wrong, we run corrections. That's another thing that not everybody does, and I'm sort of proud of our track record. And that segues into one of the first topics I wanted to mention. That is the concept of fake news, which you may have heard a lot about in recent years. I think the concept of fake news stems from sort of a basic psychological thing, is that we all have bias. I think if you're honest with yourself, you have biases about whether it's people, whether it's issues. You all have things you want to believe. And it is human nature to want to seek information that reaffirms those bias, that tells you what you want to hear. And what we have now more than ever before is just an abundance of organizations, that's a generous word, that want to capitalize on that. Some are really partisan, hardcore ideological ones that are trying to only build their base. But increasingly, we have these money-making operations that just don't give a flip about anything. What they have discovered, and the New York Times and the Washington Post have written about these, is they've discovered there's a market of people who only want to hear what they want to hear. And so they just make things up whole cloth. And these are the ones, when you read a story that says Michelle Obama has had more servants than any first lady in the history of the United States, or that Melania Trump used to be a stripper. There's not even a hint of truth to these things, but what these folks have realized is that there is a money-making market in telling people what they want to hear, and there's no accountability for them. So the question I think people ask me and that I try to stress is, well, what are we going to do? How do we stop fake news? And I'd say there's two parts of it, and one's on the consumers and one's on the media. For the consumers, I say, don't spread it. Don't parrot it. Take, for instance, emails. You all get chain emails. They're the ones that say forward, forward, forward before they come to you. Almost always, they're not true. And that may sound like a broad statement, but it's accurate. And I can tell you this. PolitiFact is a Pulitzer Prize-winning fact-checking agency. They do great work. In fact, if you're ever curious about something and whether it's true, PolitiFact is a good source to do that. PolitiFact, a couple of years ago, took 120 political emails, left, right, whatever. They were on all sides, and they vetted them for truthfulness. Out of 120 emails that they took, 100 were lies. So I think that comes out to about 83%. There's at least an 83% chance that any email you get is just not true, unless it's sourced from a news organization that you trust. And so when people say, how do we stop it, I say the responsibility of that rests with the consumers, because as long as there is a market for that kind of thing, there's going to be people who want to feed that. I also tell people to seek out varied sources of news. You really have to want and seek out diverse opinions. If the only thing you're watching is Fox, or if the only thing you're watching is MSNBC, I guarantee you're only going to hear one point of view on those two things. When I try to do it, I do some Fox, I'll do some MSNBC, I'll do some CNN. Usually when I'm on the treadmill, so I can burn whatever's ticking me off when they talk about it out of my system. But one of the other things I tell people, and this may sound self-serving, is read newspapers. Another thing that we do better than anyone else, I think, is we offer diverse opinions. And if you look back on the editorial page on any given day, you will see letters to the editors, you will see national columns, you will see editorials that come from the left and the right. And I think it's important to get those different perspectives, because if you're not hearing that, you're going to continue to believe what you always want to believe. And the other thing, the other side of that equation on how you combat fake news is rests with the media. And I think the thing that the media needs to do is do what it's always done, is seek out the truth and tell it aggressively. Unfortunately, we are seeing falsehoods at a rate like we haven't ever before. And I wanted to give you a couple of recent examples. One of them, unfortunately, stems from our country's new national security advisor, Michael Flynn, who has gotten a lot of attention for sort of peddling in some of this stuff. And one of his stories came on my radar because it involves something I write about here in Florida. Now, Michael Flynn has been trying to tell people that Muslims are trying to take over America, and that many communities are trying to implement Sharia law, which is sort of the fundamental women are evil, violent protest, that cities are trying to make that the law of the land across America. And as evidence in one of his speeches, and this man, by the way, is your new national security advisor, he said, quote, "In the state of Florida, They have 36 senators at the state level. 12 of them are Democrats, and all 12 Democrats voted to impose Sharia law at the local and state level. Let me tell you something. In that entire sentence, the only thing that is true is that Florida is in fact a state. I mean, he had the number of senators wrong. There's 40. He had the number of Democrats wrong. Most importantly, there's never been a bill in the Florida legislature. You people live here. Can you imagine Rick Scott or the Speaker of the House saying, you know what, it's time to float the Sharia law bill? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. But anyway. We also had another one just last week that you all are probably a little bit more familiar with, but I give it because it's a pretty concrete one, is that America, and I'll say both sides of the aisle on this one, we're engaging in what I think was one of the dumbest debates we've had in a while, and that's whose inauguration was bigger. And the president's new spokesman came out for it, and he said, we know that the president's, Trump's inauguration was better attended because more people rode the D.C. Metro during this inauguration than they did 4 years ago in Barack Obama's. That's not a debatable point. You know, you can see my blazer and argue whether it's blue or black. These are numbers, and it was very easily verifiable. And the numbers showed that the D.C. Metro had 500,000 people, which is a lot for Donald Trump, 700,000 people for Barack Obama, and I would argue also interesting, 1 million people at the Women's March the next day. But, I see women. But my point is, these things are not unknowable and they're not debatable. Facts are concrete things, and I think it's the media's job to seek those out and make sure make sure we continue to tell them. And I think that's a good segue into sort of the divisiveness of politics. And I will tell you that I think it's as bad as it's ever been. I'd like to hope it's getting better, but I'm not sure. And I saw a lot of it, as you all did, during the past presidential election. And I will tell you that I do not always get things right. If my wife was here, she could do a 30-minute talk on why I do not always get things right. But that goes for the column, too. But I did get Trump right in that I listened to his supporters. And when I went back to a rally at UCF in August of 2015, this was a long time ago, even before Matt asked me to speak here, I could tell, and I wrote at the top of my column in August of 2015, this man may very well be our next president. And I will tell you, there were a lot of liberals, and there were a lot of elites, and there were a lot of media folks who just scoffed. The Huffington Post was probably the worst at this. They actually refused to cover Donald Trump's campaign as a political campaign for their first 6 months, I think it was. They relegated all Trump stories to their entertainment section. They put disclosures at the bottom of their... That's not a straightforward way to cover these things. And why could I tell that? Because there were massive crowds, and they weren't anecdotal. There were 5,000, 10,000, 30,000, 50,000 people at every one of the stops he did, and it wasn't just an around thing. And I talked to the people. I think that's another thing that sometimes media get wrong, that you write from behind your desk, or you're only watching MSNBC. And I learned that there was a hunger for something different. And that hunger is something that I think is shared by people of all parties, by liberals and moderates as well. Frustrated by the same thing. These people, by special interests, unresponsiveness, a disconnect between D.C. politicians and the people they're supposed to serve. Trump supporters were not, as some liberals would like to say, all bigots or know-nothings. They had the same kind of frustrations as everybody else did. And as I wrote in my Sunday column after the election, I thought that cable TV pundits simply looked foolish on election eve when they stood there slack-jawed, sort of befuddled by the fact that Trump had won. Well, if it was a secret, it was a really poorly kept one, because 50 million people voted for the man. And the theme, and this is probably the one I'm going to hone in on for the rest of this afternoon, was listening. I don't think a lot of the people who were pontificating or telling the stories, or the pundits or running the poll, were really listening to what other people were saying. But I have to tell you, that is not a one-way street. And I found it remarkable that right after, and I spent all kinds of time ticking off liberals saying you're not listening, you can't just easily brush all these Trump supporters one way. I found it remarkable that just after this past weekend, when 1 million women, or whatever the number was, marched in Washington, marched in Chicago, marched in New York, they filled Lake Eola Park over there, I was amazed at how many Trump supporters quickly dismissed that as a bunch of women who should stay home, stop griping about it. how soon you forget. I was very loud in saying you can't underestimate the mass of people who are speaking up for Trump. You're a fool if you ignore the mass of people who are now speaking up, against him. I just think people spend a lot more time yelling than they do listening. And as one really silly example I can share, because people don't believe this, I one time had a woman call me, and I answered the phone, and she said she just started ranting about the column I had written in favor of illegal immigration. That was confusing to me because I'd never written a column in favor of illegal immigration. In fact, the column I had written on that day happened to be my suggestion for how you crack down on illegal immigration, which deals with E-Verify and starting at the businesses, and that could be a whole nother talk. And I told her, I don't even know what you're talking about. And about 1 minute into the conversation, she admitted, she goes, I didn't even read your column. I just saw the headline and I knew what you were going to say. I think, unfortunately, that's getting to be more common. That sort of attitude. You don't need to listen, and the divisive tones trouble me. And and it's one thing that I found myself thinking about just very recently. It was a conversation I had with Bob Graham. I sat down with our former governor about a week and a half. Actually, it was Friday, 2 weeks ago today. And last week I wrote a column about Bob Graham. And in case you all didn't see that, and really, why wouldn't you have seen it? Please read the paper. But if you didn't see it, it was a story about how Bob Graham, who's now age 80, is still traveling the state almost every week. And he is championing the same causes he championed back when he was governor: environment, education, urging people to get active, telling them to stop griping in emails and on Facebook, but to get active and speak up. One of the remarkable things is I knew Bob Graham was popular back when he was governor, but I actually looked up the numbers, and it's really kind of mind-blowing. When Bob Graham left office, he had an approval rating of 83%. You can't get 83% of people to agree that the moon isn't made of green cheese right now. By comparison to that, and let me back up. This one's even more shocking. In his entire 8 years in office, Bob Graham's approval rating never, I repeat, never dropped below 74%. By comparison, Rick Scott has never gotten out of the 40s. He's actually spent some time in the 20s. I have a bunion that has better approval ratings than Rick Scott's had at times. But the thing I found myself thinking about was, could a Bob Graham even exist today? Could a guy who had ideas that I think it's pretty clear most of Florida embraced, could he be that popular today in an environment where the screaming is so nonstop, where people have already decided that they don't like someone or they don't like the message before they hear it because of the D or the R next to their name? And I think that all comes back to listening. So, yeah. Now, I want to go and talk a little bit about the issues that Florida is facing, because they're the issues Bob Graham cares about, and I'm guessing they're the issues you care about too. One of them is the environment, and this is a little bit of a sneak peek at my column that I have for Sunday, which, by the way, I have to go finish when I'm done with you all here. It's about the environment. Bob Graham believes that the environment may be the next great rallying point of Florida, and he points out that it was a rallying point of Floridians about 50 years ago, and I absolutely agree with him. And if you haven't been paying attention to the things that have happened in this state, let me recap them for you real quickly. Last year, and these things just happened last year alone, we had toxic algae absolutely choke off the Treasure Coast and the waterways around there, to the extent that businesses closed down and noxious fumes enveloped entire communities. This was green, reach your hand into the water and pick it up kind of stuff. A few months ago, we had a massive sinkhole open up at a fertilizer plant in Lake County, and where 215 million gallons of slightly toxic, radioactive, and acidic waste seeped into the ground. The thing that's the most disturbing about this is not only did the company not tell the people who lived around there that 215 million, your government kept the secret along with the company, with Mosaic. For 3 weeks, they hid it until I can't even remember who unveiled it. I think it was one of the I'll say it was a newspaper. Finally revealed that it had happened. We have this past year, your state is in the process of trying to redo its water standards to decide what kind of pollutants you can allow. And right now, there are proposals from Florida's Department of Environmental Protection, and boy, I've got air quotes around that, to allow more cancer-causing agents into the Florida waterways. And I'm not talking about mild ones. I'm talking about things that cause leukemia and cause your cause bladder cancer. The proposal is to allow higher levels of this. I submit we could walk up and down Park Avenue from now until the end of 2017, and if you asked every single person who wants more carcinogens in your water, I don't think you'd get a single person who would say yes. And keep in mind, this all comes against a backdrop of a state that is right now in the midst of an $8 billion cleanup of the Everglades from allowing all sorts of agriculture, fertilizer, and development runoff to pollute. And almost everyone, and by the way, some of these things were done by both parties, including Bob Graham with the sugar a little bit. But every one of these things was preventable. In almost every one of these cases, there were environmental watchdogs who said, this is going to be a problem, we're going to have to pay. And we do have to pay. And that's what I finally realized why this keeps happening. Because the people who do it don't pay. You pay. You pay every single time. And the epiphany I had was one day I'd written all these environmental columns in the Chamber of Commerce, the Florida Chamber, and the businesses. They were always against the environmental measures. And then there was a $1 billion restoration effort down at the Everglades. And all these Chamber of Commerce folks were down there cheering the big restoration effort. And I thought, well, these are the people who were opposed to the pollution methods that started. And then it finally, I mean, it's obvious now, they get to make money both ways. You get the money to pollute and you get the money to get the contract to clean it up. You pay. Every single time you pay. And I hope that more people will not only realize that it's cheaper for the taxpayers in the first place, but it's better for the environment. And I hope people start caring enough to vote that way as well. In the coming year, we've had a lot of change as far as political things I'm going to be watching. We have a brand new congressional delegation, and when I say brand new, you all may know it's entirely new. There is nobody who has left from here. There was something for everyone, because you lost John Micah, you lost Alan Grayson. There's somebody who's happy about both of those things, or at least one of those things. I liked John Micah's ability to get things done. I can also tell you my favorite John Micah story real quick. We were at the Republican National Convention, I'm going to say in D.C., New York. They all sort of run together. And John got himself in a little bit of a pickle where he got caught, I think it was by ABC News, going into what was supposed to be a secret fundraiser for a lobbyist who'd gotten some, in some trouble. And a cameraman got some video of John going into there. And the story moved across the wire. Florida congressman headbutts ABC cameraman. Yeah, just headbutts, and there's video of John, boom, right into the, so I ran into him later, and I said, John, what was that all about? And he said, Scott, you have to believe me, that guy almost knocked my hair off. So, yeah. So you have to say that, you have to give him credit for a sense of humor. But I will tell you why John Micah lost. Part of it was absolutely because of redistricting, which, by the way, was a good thing, and that is people power. The districts were wildly gerrymandered. Corinne Brown's district started up in Jacksonville and went down to Pine Hills. And a lot of Republicans would point to Corinne Brown as being in a gerrymandered district. Well, you're right, she was in a gerrymandered district, but it wasn't for Corinne Brown. She liked it. She was in that district because it sucked every black Democrat between Duval County and Orange County out of their districts. It's known as bleaching in political terms. So I like purple districts. That's what this state is. That's what this region is. I like districts where both sides have to compete against each other and they're not pre-drawn. Well, John Micah had adopted some stances that, frankly, were for a very red district and didn't ever moderate. And I realized that he knew he was in trouble when I was moderating a forum last year for congressional candidates. And one of the first questions we asked everybody in the room was, where do you stand on universal background checks for guns? Now, for those of you who don't know, this is not a divided topic. No matter what you may read, where people try to pose it as an equal number, universal background checks, and by that I mean where everybody has to get a background check to prove they are not one of two things, either A, a convicted felon, or B, mentally ill to the extent that you've been institutionalized, should buy a gun. People agree with this, generally, 80 to 90%. We asked that room full of people where you stand on that issue, and every single member, it was several races. There was like 18 people running for Congress. 17 of those members gave a direct answer, yes or no. John Micah was the only one who refused to give an answer. Now, John Micah knows good and well where he stands on that issue. John Micah's voted on that issue. He's voted against background checks for his entire career. But he knew that he was no longer representing a bright red neighborhood, and a guy who I'd always respected as being pretty outspoken couldn't bring himself to say where he stood that day. And that was the day where I realized, oh my God, he actually thinks he might lose. And he did lose. And I think that that's because there were people who really respected what he did, and I would include myself among them. I mean, he transformed the transportation landscape of Central Florida with the airport, with Sunrail, with I-4. The verdict's still out on whether that's a good thing or not. But he did all that. But there were people who were saying, well, I appreciate all that, but I'm tired of sending you to D.C. and voting against my core beliefs, whether that's with gun control, whether that's with health care, whether that's with abortion issues, whatever it was. So I think that finally caught up to him. I still like John. In fact, I championed him. I thought he would have been a good transportation secretary for Donald Trump, who I think could use some help filling out his cabinet. But that didn't, and Michael was interested in that also, but that didn't pan out. So now we have Stephanie Murphy, who is the Democrat who replaced her. I don't know her. What I do know, I know she's smart. She's a former member of the Department of Defense, Rollins College professor. But I also know her campaign was almost completely run by D.C. operatives. And there was a lot of outside money. And that troubles me no matter which side of the aisle you are. So the neat thing, though, is she's got 2 years to prove herself. And once again, she's running in that same purple district that she won in. It's about a 50-50 split between Democrats and Republicans. By the way, that doesn't mean it's 50-50. The fastest growing party is the non-party, which I'm a member of, by the way. It's actually something like 38-38, and the rest are independents and unaffiliated. But she's got 2 years, and if she doesn't prove herself, I guarantee you the Republicans are going to find somebody else, whether it's Mike or somebody else, to give her a run for their money. So that'll be fun to watch. In the U.S. Senate race, Bill Nelson has consistently remained one of Florida's most popular politicians. I will submit that, sort of like John Micah, that is because he is a workhorse. He's not a guy who parachutes into the controversial issues of the day. In fact, sometimes he's working on issues that I think people would consider pretty dull. Keeping Social Security offices open, fighting citrus canker, dangerous airbags. If you paid any attention to that Takata, I think I'm saying that right, airbag settlement, which was a big deal where people died. Bill Nelson was absolutely at the front of that. And that was not a sexy issue, basically saying to the company that made the Toyota airbags Takata, if you make bags that explode and kill people, that's a problem. So Bill Nelson's been that. There are people who want to run against him, most namely Rick Scott. Is the governor, is raising gobs of money right now, and he's only, a year and a half into his 2 years into his term. He's raising a lot of money, so there's talk that he wants to run. The thing that Rick Scott will run up against, I think, is that he has had relatively weak opponents the last 2 times he ran. Alex Sink, as much as I liked her and her Mayberry accent, she was not a great campaigner. Charlie Crist, who knew what the hell he was? He was a Republican one day, he's an independent, and then he's a Democrat. It was hard for people to get too excited. Bill Nelson is not Charlie Crist or Alex Sink. So if Rick Scott decides to take him on, I think that he will have his hands full. And then we have to think about who's going to be our next governor. And people are absolutely already lining up for that. On the Republican side, that's 2018, and they will start filing. It's 2017, so they will start filing very soon. On the Republican side, the most likely candidate is Adam Putnam, who is your agriculture commissioner. There was, a while ago, there was talk that it might be Adam Putnam or Pam Bondi, but her star has sort of faded. All right, so you want some Pam Bondi? I wasn't going to go into all this. I will tell you she is one of my least favorite elected officials in this state. And that's the... And I will tell you, I come from that honestly. And when I tell you, that might surprise you, I actually championed her campaign when she was Attorney General. And not only did I champion it, she relied on me. I will never forget a time when I was driving to a fundraiser, I think for Nemours Hospital or something down at the airport, and my cell phone rang, and it was Pam Bondi, who was at that point in time running for Attorney General. And at that point in time, I had been running a series of columns about wrongful convictions and a whole group of bad cases in Brevard County where it looked like people had been wrongly convicted. And Pam Bondi was going to go on Geraldo on Fox that night. And Geraldo had read my column, and Geraldo was really interested in the topic. And Pam Bondi said, "Scott, can you get me up to speed on this?" And normally I don't help politicians do something, but my only real issue at that point in time was if people had been wrongfully convicted, I wanted it probed. And so I gave her the full breakdown. She said, thank you, Scott. If I get elected Attorney General, you have my word. I am going to go and look at every one of these cases. She went on Geraldo's show, and she said, if I get elected, she never did a thing for those cases. So I'll give people a chance, but that one, that was pretty clear to me. And unfortunately, that was just the beginning. She began her tenure by ousting some investigators in her office who were some of the best mortgage foreclosures. These were the people who helped families stay in their home when the mortgage companies were breaking the law. They got a review that said it was the top marks of job performance, and 1 month later, she ousted them all after the mortgage companies complained about her. She one time made the request, I'm sure some of you remember this, to postpone an execution that was scheduled. Why? Because she had a campaign fundraiser scheduled the same night. I'm actually not a fan of the death penalty for reasons that we could talk about some other time. She is a fan of the death penalty. In fact, she filed something called the Death Penalty, I think it's like Speed Up the Death Penalty Act, except when she has a fundraiser plan. Then she wanted to boot it for 3 months. And then the most troubling thing, I shouldn't say most. Another troubling thing she's done is the $25,000 she took from Donald Trump while she was being asked to investigate Trump University. I've been really clear in saying that this was not about Donald Trump in my estimation. In fact, when I started writing about this 3 years ago, Donald Trump wasn't even a candidate. It is wrong, unquestionably wrong, for a prosecutor to take money from someone she has been asked or he has been asked to investigate. If that doesn't make sense to you, and I think it does to most people, I would say think about it this way. If your wife or your husband, if your wife was mugged and you thought you knew who did the mugging and you went to the state attorney and you said, I think it's that guy, and then that guy gave the state attorney $25,000 and the state attorney said, you know what, I'm not going to pursue charges against that guy. This isn't complicated. So anyway, I'm not upset that Pam Bondi is not in the running for that. So Adam Putnam looks likely on the Republican side. On the Democrat side, one possibility is Gwen Graham, who is Bob Graham's daughter. One thing I've learned is that your last name alone is not enough to get anybody elected. I bet most of you all don't even remember that Lawton Childs' son ran a campaign for governor about, 12 years ago. His name was Bud Childs. He didn't even register on the blip. My point is, if people think that someone's going to coast in because of their parents' name, it won't happen. So she's a possibility. But the other guy who's really shaking up things as a potential Democratic challenger is John Morgan. Now, John is smart and John is successful, but he's also been crude. I don't have to tell you that. And he has some, I'll just say, bumps in the road. And when he told me he was running, I told him that I thought that would be a tough road for him. But the thing that I've learned is I'm not sure whether the things that I thought people would be troubled by trouble people anymore. And one of the arguments that other people have made, I would have thought that if a candidate for United States president was caught on video saying, you can grab women by that would have been disqualifying. One thing we've talked about in the area of political analysis, I don't use the word disqualifying anymore. I don't know what you could do anymore that people would say, no, that's the one thing. So I think John Morgan says, I got an opening. What people see is they want a guy who's successful. They don't care if you got a little crudeness to it and can get things done. And I think he's taking the Donald Trump model, except on the left side, and he wants to do that. I don't know whether he's going to run, but something I wouldn't have thought was possible. Am I going to get hauled off? No. I know I've been going too long. But I wanted to conclude now, and I'll take a couple of questions. And I think that's what I want to get back to. The thing I want to stress about whether there's things are disqualifying anymore, we got to get back to listening to each other. We, as a society, as a media, we have to get back to demanding truth. I think we have to demand accountability. I don't think either party, has a monopoly on good ideas, and I know neither party has a monopoly on stupidity. I think we got to look beyond the party labels, beyond the sound bites, and demand more from our leaders and from ourselves, and I certainly say more from the media. So thank you for having me with you today. Don't do that. I'll be embarrassed. No. But I will happily take any questions you all might have about politics or the newspaper or my personal life, and Joe's got one right off the bat. I know better than to get in his way. I can hear you. I can repeat it if.
How do you feel about Trump's cabinet choices?
Well, they're wild, and I mean they're pretty varied. I will tell you, I don't get as troubled by some of the ones that have troubled other people. Rex Tillerson, I don't know. I mean, he's been a businessman for most. I'm not as worked up about him as somebody. You know who was pathetic in that whole thing? Rex Tillerson? Marco Rubio was the pathetic one. He is the one who got up and screamed bloody murder about Rex Tillerson and then cast the deciding vote to advance his confirmation. So that was, I will tell you, and I mentioned this to the people at the table, of all the and there's some fine ones as well. I think Elaine Chao, she's who beat out John Mike, I guess, for transportation. She may be fine. I'll tell you who troubles me is Betsy DeVos. And I wrote a column about her a couple of Sundays ago. I don't normally weigh in on national things, but Florida has been the petri dish for the education reform movement and the accountability movement. And we could do another entire talk on that. But what you have in Florida right now is just nonstop testing to the extent where 60, 80, even 90 days in some districts of a 180-day school year have been interrupted by some kind of testing model. I like tests. I believe in tests. I took the SAT. I want my kids to take the SAT. I do not want their school year dictated by it. I do not want what happened to my son in 4th grade. An entire 9 weeks of his science classes, they're divided, were just simply cut. Why? Because it was one of the benchmark years for testing English writing, so they just cut science so they could run testing drills for 9 months. I don't want, and they do all these things, the reform movements, so people obviously dislike the public education system, and then they say, all right, well, things really stink here. Would you like a voucher? I mean, a lot of it is designed to push people away, and then you say, okay, well, the vouchers, what kind of accountability? You've been demanding all these tests. What kind of accountability do you have with the vouchers? They don't do any of it. There's no testing requirement. That's why Betsy DeVos is one of the most troubling to me. But overall, I think it's a mixed bag. And I think people who object to all of them just because they're Trumps make a mistake. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the effect of outside money in the Micah race, but it also, I believe, occurred with Jeff Ashton and the defeat of him.
Yep.
And that was supposedly Soros money, which Soros money is everywhere. How do you feel about that?
Yes, I don't feel good. I wrote 2 columns about that. And I don't, well, that doesn't make me feel good, but thank you for telling the whole room. I appreciate that. I will tell you that I'm not a fan, but one of the things I run into is I will run into, and this is not you, but people in general, they will say, I saw, and it wasn't supposedly, it was Jeff Soros money. He came and dumped over $1 million into this very local race and tried to portray Jeff Ashton, who I can take or leave, but tried to portray him as a racist. It was pure race baiting to get him out of light. I will have people come to me and say, I saw George Soros dumped all this money into the race, and I am so angry about it. And I say, I was angry about it too. Now, were you angry about Betsy DeVos dumping money into the school board? I didn't see much about that. Okay, were you mad about the Koch brothers dumping into the legislature? And vice versa, people complaining about the Koch brothers and not about George Soros. If you're going to be troubled by this stuff, you have to be troubled by it on both sides. Otherwise, you're not really troubled by it. You're just pissed off your side didn't win. And that's what we run into. So yes, I was excuse me my language there, that was inappropriate. Yes, I was troubled by it, and I think there are going to be a lot of eyes on Aramis Ayala is her name, and mine will be 2 of them. Yes.
Scott,
Yes, oh, hello, Michelle.
I would like your opinion about Stephen not Bannon. What's his name?
Bannon.
Bannon, yes, who is a very close advisor and was formerly the editor of Breitbart, and he has sort of made the media the enemy. And what do you think about his comment that the media should just shut up?
Yeah.
And what do you think the implications of that are for a free press?
I don't think, frankly, there's going to be many implications to that. But what that is part of is a very intentional strategy, and not really, possibly a smart strategy. I wouldn't say good for society, but a smart strategy. And actually, I did a segment on Friends Talking Faith on WMFE this week that was all about that. And the strategy of the Trump campaign has been to discredit the media all the way along. Every time there's an unflattering story, whether it's true or not, you say it's fake news. And what you're able to do is by telling people over and over again, don't believe them, don't believe them, don't believe them, you've neutralized the messenger. There's no possibility, no matter what you do and no matter how true it might be, among some segment that they'll never believe it. Well, I don't believe the New York Times. But I will tell you who doesn't believe that. Donald Trump doesn't believe that. At the UCF rally that I mentioned, Donald Trump did about 5 minutes, bashing the media, talking about how you shouldn't believe anything they read. He called out the press pin like he always does and told everybody at the audience to boo people. And I kid you not, without taking a breath between the segue between the media bashing, he said, by the way, did you all see that story on me on the New York Times? It was wonderful. I mean, one of the biggest falsehoods I think I hear about Trump is that he doesn't care. He very much cares about what is said about him, and I think that's actually what's driving. I mean, why else do you have the battle over whose inauguration was bigger, which is, by the way, like a locker room conversation of sorts, a metaphor anyway. Yes,
In
ma'am.
these confusing and disturbing times that we have,
Hold your mic.
you always,
I can
No.
repeat it if.
Not closer, this way.
in these confusing and disturbing times that we have, you always seem to be able to keep your perspective. How do you do that? How do you keep from getting discouraged with all of this, these things that are going on around us that are so terribly disturbing?
Well, I appreciate that question. The question is, how do I keep from being discouraged when bad things happen? And I will tell you, I don't accept all the praise that I might get, but I do accept that one because I think you have to put it in perspective. And you know what? Over Christmas, my family went to D.C. We spent the holidays, 15 Maxwells, going to the Smithsonian, touring the White House, seeing a show at the National Theater. And I have to tell you, when you go to something like the Holocaust Museum, it puts things in perspective. When you see the tragedies that this nation has undergone and played a role in, it is both a good warning for things could happen again, but it's also encouraging to know that we have overcome these things before. And one of the things I got a little weary of was my liberal friends running around proclaiming the end of the world after Donald Trump, because I guarantee you if you're running around with your hair on fire, that's the only life you're going to see. That's the only perspective you're going to see. I believe that we as a nation are bigger than any one individual. I still believe that the presidency is an office that is answerable to the people. And I think that there are cottage industries that are always interested in ginning up everything. If one of the things I tell people is on a scale of 1 to 10, there's no 3s, 4s, and 5s anymore. Everything is ranked as a 10. And I think you got to have a little bit of that in perspective. And so I also believe that the biggest difference any of us can make are in our own communities. It is easy to spend an hour watching national TV news and wanted to, turn your house into a bunker and not want to but you guys know this. You're involved in the difference. There's a reason I don't stay focused on national issues. I believe the biggest difference I can make are nonprofits. I believe the heart of soul of any community and be a decent father or husband or whatever it is. And I think that's, if more people stay focused on the things they can control, they won't get freaked out by the things they can't. Yes.
You start looking at the environment, please take a look at the south dike of Lake Okeechobee.
South side of Lake.
The dike
Yes, sir. Yes, there's some flooding
built by
issues.
Herbert Hoover.
Yes, there are a lot of Everglades issues. That actually may be getting more attention than some of the other environmental issues. But yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Scott, how do you feel about the state level banning state workers to talk about climate change? And then you think on the federal level, federal workers are banned from talking about climate change.
That is.
How do you feel about that as a freedom of speech issue?
That is a good question. I actually did a tweet, because that's how all great journalists communicate these days, in 140 characters or less, after this week when it was revealed that all references to climate change were deleted from federal agencies. And you are right, sir. Rick Scott at one point in time was caught banning state workers from using the words climate change. Do you all remember the Family Circus cartoon where occasionally the little boy would close his eyes and then he thought everything else disappeared in the world? That's what kind of public policy that strikes me as. If you close your eyes and pretend you can't see it, then it doesn't exist anymore. And I think that public policy will work out about as well for our country and state as it did for that 4-year-old.
Speaking locally, where do you think Buddy Dyer is going?
I feel pretty strongly he's going to UCF. And part of the reason I feel pretty strongly about that is because Buddy Dyer said he would like to succeed John Hitt at UCF before John Hitt ever said he was going anywhere. I think John was surprised by that as anybody. So, yeah. Yeah. And if that's, I don't want to keep you too long. All right.
Did I see something?
All right, yes, sir.
Your thoughts, please, on the sudden resignation of 4 of the top career diplomats in the diplomatic corps.
Yeah, the question is thoughts on the resignation of the top diplomats basically in the American intelligence community. That was one of the things I asked Bob Graham about. And this is one of the reasons I like him, because there are a lot of people on the left who, when you say, what do you think about that, they'll immediately say Trump's an idiot. And he's ruining things. One of the things Bob Graham said is, I do not blame any president for questioning what they are being told by the intelligence community. And his proof of that was, he said, perhaps if George W. Bush had asked more questions of the intelligence regarding Iraq, we wouldn't have gotten into that war. I thought that was a valid point. However, Bob Graham didn't stop there. He said, however, what Trump seems to have done is picking fights for sake of picking fights and not questioning intelligence because he believes the information is sound, questioning intelligence because it's not what he wanted to hear. And Bob Graham would say that's not the kind of thing that is skeptical or critical thinking. That's the kind of thing that endangers a national defense. And I think I'm prone to agree with him on that.
Are there any more? Okay.
We'll do one more because I don't want to keep you long. Yes, ma'am.
I am curious about your feelings about the wall that's being built that Mexico is supposed to pay for. They're not paying for it. Who's paying for it? No one has an answer.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think, if anybody really believed that promise, that we're going to build a wall and Mexico is going to pay for it, I think they were either choosing to believe it or choosing to suspend rational, just thoughts there. The proposal that came up yesterday was a tax or a tariff on goods that made in Mexico. You guys are smart people. You're members of the university club. Who pays for a tax on goods that are brought into it ain't Mexico. It's people in the United States who are buying them. So I don't think there's ever a scenario where Mexico is going to pay for it. If I had to guess, because I actually gave this a good deal of thought, there will be something at some point down the road where there is a deal where it's made and Donald Trump will somehow couch it that we got $3 trillion on the deal, and he will say that's how Mexico paid for our wall. There are a lot of people who will tell you a giant wall is the most expensive and least effective way to handle immigration. You want to go back to it, it comes back to what I talked about before, E-Verify. E-Verify is basically what it says is every company that makes a hire has to run a hire through a database that proves it is a legal citizen. It is that simple. And the companies, particularly the low-wage companies in this country, absolutely do not want to do it because you're not going to get your bananas for 39 cents a pound if you have to pay everyone United States minimum wage. I find fascinating when I hear people claim about illegal immigration and also object to proposals to pay a penny more per pound on tomatoes. Those things don't work well together. So E-Verify, I think, would be a better way to handle immigration than the wall. But the business community, particularly agriculture, does not want it, so I don't expect it to happen. So anyway, thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure being with you today.
Okay, I just want to thank you all for coming. I want to thank George's for providing such a wonderful dinner, and have a nice weekend. Thank you.